Radio 1 FM 90.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
A very warm welcome to Spectrum here on Radio 1. My name is Edmond, Kizito, your host. Tonight on Spectrum, we review the week with a special focus on the violence and irregularities in the mayoral race. We shall also look at other issues happening. Things like Egypt, basically Libya. Egypt is no longer in the news. What is in the news right now is Libya and other issues. We'll look at this all in context. Well, this week has been dominated by the massive irregularities and violence which characterize the postponed Kampala local council elections. Several ballot boxes were seized containing pre-ticked ballot papers in favor of Peter Sematimba, while many polling stations were manned by people perceived to be NRM supporters. Some polling stations opened as early as 5:30 a.m. and by 7 a.m., which is the official opening time for your voting, many boxes were already filled up with ballots beyond the number of voters even available on their registers, the official registers. The election was also characterized by violence after stick-wielding men seen showing up from Super FM, their studios, which are owned by Peter Sematimba, one of the candidates, beating up journalists and innocent bystanders, leaving most of them bleeding and admitted to hospitals. The Uganda Red Cross reported that up to 29 victims were treated for several injuries, including brain hemorrhage. Accusations have been labeled against all camps, with each side calling for the disqualification of a candidate who will be found culpable for the irregularities and the violence. Police says it has arrested close to 101 people, and already a group of youths from Mukono district working as agents of mayoral aspirant Arias Lukwago have been charged in court. The Lukwago camp says Sematimba connived with the Electoral Commission and the police to massively rig the mayoral elections. So tonight we round up the week, reflecting on the events that characterize this exercise as we continue to get explanations from all the camps involved to try and arrive at the truth. So one of our guests is Mr. Peter Sematimba, one of the mayoral aspirants, and the man in the eye of the storm. We expect him to join us shortly. In the studio with me right now, though, I have Mr. Opio, a legal consultant, a political analyst, working also with AKJUL. You're most welcome, Mr. Opio.
Thank you very much, Edmond, and good evening, listeners.
Nicholas, can you give us a roundup of facts, what you saw, heard, and witnessed surrounding the polling day for the mayoral race?
Fortunately or unfortunately, I was in Kampala to witness what happened in the LC5 and mayoral race in Kampala. I must admit, many of the things that I saw, both physically and on TV, that were captured by reporters, was extremely shameful, was very despicable and deplorable. It is a very big shame on the democratic history of our country that after a seemingly successful and peaceful presidential election, we had a very, very, very disorganized and glaringly rigged mayoral election in Kampala. I think that what happened, the beating up of people by vigilante groups, the outright rigging and ballot stuffing, the otherwise seemingly laid-back response by security officials in the face of all of this was extremely saddening for me. And for me that says a couple of things. One, it is for me a testament of the incompetence of the Electoral Commission in organizing a free and fair election. I now do not believe that the presidential election was as peaceful as it was, because if it was, why wasn't the mayoral election that rigged? I think that there is more to it than just what we saw. So it brings to focus the competence of the Electoral Commission in organizing a free and fair election, specifically on the safety of polling materials. How did ballot papers end up in the hands of private individuals? How did ballot boxes end up in the hands of private individuals? Where were they being stored? were the ballot papers that were stuffed in ballot boxes really genuine ballot papers? Are there some security features on our ballot papers that will differentiate it from fake ballot papers? Is there a process anyway to determine whether a particular cast ballot paper is genuine or not? So these are questions that I think the EC must answer, because what happened is a serious indictment on the EC. The second thing that I think what happened raised was the question of the emergence of vigilante groups. In the run-up to the elections, there were allegations of groups being recruited to wreak havoc, to wreak violence. These groups never emerged in the presidential elections campaign, but were evidently seen on camera in the mayoral race. Stick welding group of people walking alongside a very heavily, armed, presence of security officials in town, and then no one arrests them. It speaks volumes for me. I think that people in the security sector must answer these questions. Where did these youth groups that beat up people in Nigeria emerge from? Why were they not promptly arrested? I was watching on news last night, a businessman who is selling bows and arrows was arrested, on suspicion that his bows and arrows might end up in wrong hands. If they could arrest that single businessman coming from Arua to Kampala, why couldn't they arrest stick welding hooligans who are walking in broad daylight in Kampala? They came out of a particular building, took refuge in that particular building. The regional police commander for Kampala Metropolitan was there. He did not make arrests on the spot. So for me, that is important, and people in the security sector must respond to that. The third issue that I want to observe arising from that incident was the question of the response by the other candidates that were claiming to have been cheated. I think that Honorable Elias Lukwago, with all due respect, Honorable Mabike and the other groups did not respond to this with level-headedness. There was, I think, for me, an overtone of annoyance, an overtone of, rather insultive and insightful languages, which I think was unnecessary. But that said, all of that said, what is important is going forward. I applaud, first of all, the courage of the Commission to cancel results and then cancel the entire electoral process in Kampala. I do hope that they will organize a free and fair election and ensure that the election represents the will of the people. Secondly, the police have made arrests. I hope that the arrests will not just stop at arrests. People responsible must be found and held to account. Oftentimes, people are arrested, they are released on bond, and the matter, never sees the light of day. I think that people who have been arrested must be brought to book if they are found responsible for the chaos that characterized our election. But also, I think there should be a need for a thorough, transparent public investigation on what happened, and people behind this must be brought to book. Whether they are leaders or contestants, they should be brought to account, because what happened was criminal and an abuse of the electoral process. So the police, I think, on their part must prosecute those they have arrested, but also I think on the wider part, the Electoral Commission and government must investigate what happened in Kampala, so that people who are responsible are brought to book. And if they are contestants, they actually should be disqualified from holding public office, because the actions that we saw are not the actions of those who should be entrusted with public office.
All right, listeners, this is Spectrum on Radio 1. Tonight we are reviewing the week with a special focus on the violence and irregularities in the mayoral race. We've just been joined by Mr. Peter Sematimba, the NRM candidate in that mayoral